Hi, Chef Mary here in the Way Cool Kitchen, and today we are going to show you how to make Minnesota wild rice soup. This was one of the recipes that came in our Comfort Foods kit this week, and so this is it's part of being Minnesotan, I think, is the celebration of wild rice here in our state. And so we put together all of the things that you need to make a delicious soup, with the exception of salt and pepper. So make sure that you add salt and pepper when you're seasoning your soup. That is not in the kit here today. The other thing that you need to grab to make your kit work is 8 cups of water, and that's going to help us make our chicken stock to add into our soup. And that's the first thing I want to talk to you about today as we're making this. Is in your kit you have a little container that says chicken base on it, and the chicken base is concentrated chicken stock that we're just going to rehydrate to use in our soup. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the lid off of that, and I'm going to take and grab my spoon, and I'm just going to add that into my 8 cups of water. And I'm going to just kind of stir that up a little bit and let that sit there until we are ready to add that to our soup. You don't need to heat this up separately because we are actually going to bring it to a boil inside our soup as we're adding things in there. So I'm just going to make sure that I get all of that out, and then you've got your own chicken stock right there. And so while that is sitting there, we're going to talk about all the other stuff that needs to go into our soup today. And so in your kit, you've got carrots, celery, onions, flour, thyme, some butter, some garlic, some heavy cream. Each of you received 2 cups of heavy cream. This recipe actually calls for 1 cup of heavy cream, and so you should have 1 cup of heavy cream left over unless you want a really creamy soup, and then you could add it all in if you wanted to too. All right, so we've got that. We've got our heavy cream all measured out right here, our 1 cup, and it is time to start chopping and dicing. So when you're making soup, a lot of the base of soup is going to start off with either vegetable oil, olive oil, or butter. For this particular recipe, which is a very rich, creamy soup, we are going to actually start off, and I've got my Dutch oven here, my big pot, and I'm going to add in 4 tablespoons of butter to that, and I'm going to keep this butter up and melt it over medium heat. It's got a little bit of a sizzle right now. I'm going to grab my wooden spoon, and I'm going to push that butter around in the pan. It's bubbling, and so that tells me that the pan is definitely hot enough to melt this. And so I'm also going to trust my instincts, and I'm going to turn the heat down a little bit in this, and we're just going to let this butter melt on medium-low heat, the 4 tablespoons, while we chop up our vegetables. In your kit, you have some celery, some carrots, and some onion. And I just wanted to show you some fun ways that you can kind of cut this up so that your soup is going to taste good and pass what I call the soup spoon test. And that is when you take a bite of soup, you've got a little bit of everything in every spoonful, so you can taste all of those flavors. And so we are going to dice up our onions, our carrots, and our celery. Now, in the cooking world, this is called mirepoix. And mirepoix is a French term for the combination of these 3 ingredients. It's actually named after the Duke of Mirepoix, which was this French dude. And there's a lot of history that goes into that, and it's kind of a fun learning project to Google the origin of mirepoix and learn about the Duke of Mirepoix and his chef that actually created this kind of combination that now we use in soups and stews and sauces. It's the base for a lot of stuff in the kitchen. All right, let's get into it. When you are cutting up carrots and celery especially, the first thing, and onions, you want to make sure that all of your vegetables are clean. So I went ahead and I washed them and made sure that there was no dirt or debris on them. The other thing I did is I trimmed up the celery. And so I made sure that both of the ends were clean. Sometimes celery, the ends kind of get dried out, and we don't want to put that into our soup. And so I trimmed that. I also took and I peeled our carrots to get the extra outside skin off of the carrot. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to actually trim this carrot as well. I'm going to cut the ends off of this carrot and just get rid of those. We don't need those. We're going to put those over there. We don't need those. All right. The next thing when you're cutting up vegetables is I always like to break things down into about 2-inch pieces. This is one way that I was taught how to cut up vegetables, and it's a pretty traditional way of kind of breaking down vegetables, but it's also a really safe way, especially if you are cooking as a family. This is hard to cut like this or at the angles, but if you work with 2-inch pieces, even smaller hands can get in there and they can cut this up. The other thing to remember is carrots are roly-poly. And so the first thing I want to do for the safety in the kitchen is I want to make sure that I've got a nice flat surface. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my knife and kind of shake its hand, knife to meet you. And then I'm gonna use my other hand as the claw, and I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna hold the vegetable with my fingers and line up my knife and cut down through the carrot. So now I have 2 pieces, and they're flat pieces. These are still too big for what I consider like a small dice, which is what we're going for. So I'm gonna take those 2 small pieces and I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna press it again. You'll notice that as I get on top, I move from my hand from the side to the top of the knife and press down. And that makes sure that my fingers are not in the way of the blade ever, and I am not going to get cut. You don't have to use a knife this big. This is a chef knife. It's one of my favorite knives. I love it. But if you want to use a paring knife, you can certainly do this with a smaller paring knife as well, or like a utility knife would work just as well for this. Then I'm going to take my little spears of carrot here, and my matchsticks, if you will, and I'm going to take and I'm just going to slice down. And as I do this, I'm moving my fingers back away from my knife blade and moving them back so I can see what's going on. I'm going to turn my knife. I'm not going to scrape the blade toward my hand. I'm going to take it, I'm going to lift those up, and I'm going to add those to my diced carrots. And I'm going to continue to do that with the rest of this carrot. I'm going to break it down into smaller pieces, and then we're going to take those smaller pieces, and what we're going to do is we're just going to dice those up and get those into our soup as well. The celery is actually not much different. We're going to take the same thing. It's got kind of this U shape here. Now, everybody kind of has like their own favorite way of how they like to eat celery in their soup. If you want to just go ahead and cut those little kind of moon U-shaped pieces, little smiles, celery smiles, and put them into your soup, of course you can do it that way. I'm gonna go so I can get them like a little bit of celery and carrots and onions and everything, and I'm gonna break it up into the 2-inch pieces, and I'm gonna do the same thing I did with the carrot. I'm gonna break those into kind of these matchsticks, 2-inch matchsticks, and then I'm gonna line them up, and I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut through and cut them into little squares. If you are new to cutting and you're learning knife skills, this is a great way to practice and get better at your knife skills is cutting up mirepoix. And it really helps you practice. And so whether you're cutting up 4 pieces at a time, or you have your paring knife and you're cutting up 1 piece at a time to practice making sure you get all of those small dices the same size, both ways are really great ways to get you more comfortable cutting in the kitchen and better knife skills. And I will tell you, the better your knife skills are, the more fun cooking is in the kitchen. And I think a lot of that is just because things go a little bit faster, and so you can have more fun playing with what's going on. Our butter is melted here, and so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add in our onions to that melted butter. I don't know if you can hear that, I got a great little sizzle there. I'm gonna add in my carrots, and I'm gonna add in my celery. All 3 parts of the mirepoix are gonna go into the base of this soup. All right, now, we're also gonna add what are called aromatics into the soup once we get our mirepoix. I'm gonna take and I'm just gonna give them a little toss here and make sure they're covered in that butter so they all look kind of shiny and glossy. And what that's gonna do is that butter acts as like a little insulation that goes around all of the little vegetables and makes sure that they are cooking, but they're not burning on the bottom of that pan. And now since we got some stuff in there to actually make our soup, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna crank the heat up to like medium, low. All right, we're gonna get our extra stuff out of the way here. Our onions that we added into there we took our onion and I cleaned it and I cut it and I chopped it up. I had a really big onion, so I only used half of an onion. But one of the tricks that I like to share is that when I cut an onion, I always leave the root end attached so that when you're cutting it, you have something to hold on to as you're chopping up and cutting up your onion. And then the other aromatics that we're gonna add in here is our garlic, and then we also have some herbs. We have some thyme that we're gonna add into our mirepoix as well, our soup starter. Now this soup starter is like the soup starter for almost, oh gosh, thousands of soups. And so you could use this to even start like a marinara or a red sauce. You could use this to start like a garden tomato soup if you wanted to. And we'll show you about that in here like a little second. All right, I got my garlic. This has been, we gotta make sure that we don't have any peel on there. So I'm gonna take and I'm just gonna kind of press that garlic and peel off the skin. And then what we're gonna do for this is we're gonna chop this up as well. And when you're adding garlic, you wanna make sure that we wouldn't wanna throw in a whole garlic clove because no one would wanna eat a full garlic clove in your soup. Well, I know, I probably would eat a whole garlic clove, but most people are not gonna want a whole garlic clove on their spoon of soup. And so we're gonna make sure that we cut this up small enough. that it's going, so I kind of roughly chop through it, and then I make a little pile. And then for this kind of cut, I'm gonna do what I call like a rolling cut, and where the tip of my knife is actually not even gonna leave the cutting board. I've got my hand safely on top of my knife, and I'm gonna take and I'm just gonna start pressing it in, creating a pile every time, kind of scooting it together. And then I'm gonna keep doing that until I get to the chop size that I want. We don't necessarily need to mince this garlic, but we do wanna do what I would consider a small chop on the garlic. And so those pieces are probably like 1/8 of an inch or smaller, maybe 1/16 of an inch, I'll show you here. So I've got my garlic here. So as you can see, it's nice and small, and I'm gonna add that in. I'm gonna add that in because now our onions and celery and carrots are starting to change color a little bit. The onion is getting a little bit translucent, and then we're gonna add that garlic into there. It's already starting to smell like soup, and I'm loving this. All right, we're gonna open up our package of thyme that came with your kit, and I'm just gonna sprinkle that on top as well and get that going. And then I'm gonna give it a stir in the pot and have all of those flavors and smells come together here. And we're gonna let this continue to cook until the onion is translucent and our carrots and our celery is starting to get a little bit tender. And so right now, we've got a beautiful mirepoix right there. Carrots, onion, celery, thyme, and some garlic. Now the garlic is an addition to the mirepoix, but the soup, because we've got so much like heavy cream and rich flavors going on, I think adding that aromatic, that garlic, that thyme really kind of breaks through those heavier flavors and adds a lot to this. All right, so we've got all of that in there. Our soup starter is started. We're gonna let that cook for a little bit here, as I mentioned, and it's starting to bubble up here a little bit. This takes a little while. And so while we're doing that, I wanna talk to you a little bit about how we're gonna thicken our soup and what we're gonna add into our soup. And so for this particular recipe, our wild rice soup, this is a base recipe that we created so that you can add in things the way that you would like to make it, or maybe the way that you grew up tasting wild rice soup. And so to this, when we get to, we could add some shredded rotisserie chicken and make it a chicken and wild rice soup. A lot of wild rice soup recipes also incorporate some kind of pork to it. This is a pork-free recipe. But if you wanted to add up diced ham into this, you could. If instead of butter, you wanted to fry up some bacon and add some bacon in there and chop that up, that would be really, really good. Or if you wanted to kind of take it to the next level, you could actually get what is called a ham hock. And a ham hock is a piece of pork that has a lot of fat and flavor on it that you kind of could cook in your soup as well and add those extra flavors in there. Again, this is a vegetarian version of this soup so that you could add in what you wanted. The easiest thing, I think, is to add in that chicken, and so you just pick up a rotisserie chicken, and you probably, for this whole pot of soup, would only need like one breast piece. And so if your grocery store that you go to sells like quarter chickens or half chickens, that would be what you would need to add to this soup to do that. The other thing we're gonna talk about is how we thicken this soup. So we added, those are the proteins you can add if you wanna add proteins to the soup. The other thing that we wanna do is we wanna create what is called a roux. So a roux, unlike a kangaroo, is spelled R-O-U-X. And a roux is a thickener that when you add milk and dairy and chicken broth and liquids to it, it absorbs that and it thickens that liquid. And so what it typically is equal parts flour and butter. Is a great base roux. And so we started off with 4 tablespoons of butter inside of our pot. And so to that, I'm gonna add 1/4 of a cup or 4 tablespoons of flour on top of those vegetables. So let's check on our vegetables. We have got bubbly, delicious, softened onions, carrots, and celery. So that took about like 3 to 5 minutes to get all of that taken care of. And so then the next thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna take my flour and I'm gonna sprinkle that all over the top of this, and it's gonna coat those vegetables in that flour and create a roux around the vegetables. Roux does not need to be made with mirepoix. A roux is a thickener that can actually be made completely separately in a little pan as well and be added into your soups and stews. And so as a thickener, if you wanted to take a broth-based soup and make it a thicker, creamier soup. You could make a roux on the side, melt some butter, put some flour in there, and then add it into your soup too. Okay, we've got all of our vegetables coated in there, and so now we're gonna add that liquid. So I'm gonna go back to our giant container here, our 8 cups of our chicken base and water, and I'm gonna dump that on top, and I'm gonna scrape out any of that chicken base that was left in the bottom of my container that didn't kind of melt into that warm water, and stir that up into my soup. Trade off here and grab my wooden spoon and get that all mixed in there, because this is what's gonna give you the chicken flavor without adding the chicken. Now, if you wanted to make this fully vegetarian, of course, chicken stock is not vegetarian. So you could use a vegetable stock for this or a vegetable base, which they also sell, and then you would have a fully vegetarian wild rice soup. Okay, so we've got that in there. I'm gonna crank up the heat, and we're gonna bring this really, really nice and start to get this to bubble here. The other thing I'm gonna add at this time is our wild rice. Okay, so you've got your pouch of wild rice. This wild rice is a 30-minute cook wild rice, which means we got 30 minutes once we add this until this rice is soft enough to eat. And how we're gonna know is we are gonna taste it and we're gonna test it out. So I'm gonna add that in there. And while I'm doing this, I'm making sure that the heat is hot enough because I wanna kind of bring this to a simmer, a nice right below kind of a boil. And then I'm gonna adjust the heat and turn it down again so that rice can cook. Stir that rice into our mixture. And as it's cooking right now, it still is gonna look pretty brothy. It's gonna be pretty juicy here, it's drippy, and it's gonna thicken up as it cooks, and then we're also gonna add cream to it to thicken it, and the rice itself, as it absorbs the liquid that's in there, is gonna help thicken that soup too. So, let that cook. We're gonna stir that occasionally over the next 30 minutes and just kind of make sure nothing is sticking to the bottom of our pot. And then when we come back, we're gonna show you guys how to add the cream and finish off your soup here. So, see ya in about 30 minutes. Hi, welcome back. It has been about 30 minutes and our soup has just been percolating away on the stove here as we have stirred it occasionally, letting the rice absorb that liquid so that our wild rice is getting nice and soft and tender. Our vegetables are getting tender in there. And so now it's time to finish off our soup. And so what we're going to do is we're gonna take and we're gonna add in our cup of heavy cream into our soup here and just swirl it throughout the soup. And my heavy cream is at room temperature. And so that allows it to kind of blend in with the soup a little bit easier. It also doesn't cool down the soup necessarily. And so I like having the heavy cream measured out ahead of time so that I can just go ahead and put that in there as well. And we're gonna let that just kind of, the flavors kind of swirl together here. I've got my soup over medium heat and have been kind of just stirring it, cooking that rice over medium heat as it goes. And then it's time for soup. So I'm gonna grab my ladle, we're gonna take and I'm gonna scoop up all of those great flavors and we're gonna see if our soup passes the spoon test. So I'm gonna ladle some into my bowl here. Remember that if you're making this soup with your family, this is sometimes a job that's better suited for grown-ups because this soup is really, really, really hot. Add some of that delicious broth on top and there it is. We've got a full spoonful of all of our delicious flavors. Our carrots, our celery, our onions, our wild rice, our garlic, our cream is in there. It's hot, but it's really, really, really good. Enjoy your soup, enjoy your artisan bread, and enjoy your chocolate cake when you guys make dinner, and enjoy your comfort foods with your family and friends as you are creating all of this.